Hey book nerds, welcome to my channel. So today I'm going to film my favourite books of 2018. The way I'm doing this is I was originally going to try and do top 10 lists, and I was going to do it for my favourite books, my least favourite books, my most disappointing books, and my most surprising books. I'm still vaguely following that kind of pattern, but I couldn't make all the lists top 10, so this one is a top 10, but all the other ones are going to be random numbers. So I'm sorry about that, but I'm not going to add books to the list just because I want to make it a perfect 10. So I thought I'd start off with the positive, and I'm going to just talk about all my favourite books that I've read this year. This isn't just going to be my highest rated books. There are a lot of books that I gave 4 stars, particularly thrillers, but when I came to the end of the year and I went to review through them, I couldn't remember what they were about, so while I really enjoyed them when I was reading them, they haven't made this list because they're not my favourite books. So the worst list will work in a similar way. It's not necessarily just going to be my lowest rated books, it's going to be the books that I actively hated or that made me angry in some way. So without any further ado, the first book I'm going to talk about, and these aren't in order, so these aren't going from least favourite to most favourite, they're just going to be just randomly. I'm going to roughly do them in chronological order of how I read them. So the first book is the Meet Cute anthology by Jennifer L. Armentrout was the person who edited it, I believe. So this barely made my list, but I gave it I think 3.5 stars, and this is what I mean about them not necessarily being my highest rated books, but there were just some stories in this book that I absolutely loved, and if anyone ever asks me for romantic recommendations, I immediately just think of this book. It was such a nice fluffy read. I read it back in February around Valentine's Day, and it's just got such good representation as well. I think about maybe not half, but almost half of the stories were queer in some way. There's a wide variety of scenarios that the characters meet through. It wasn't perfect. A lot of the stories I didn't really connect with, but the ones that I did connect with I really loved. And my absolute favourite story, which is Oomph from this collection, I can still remember in vivid detail because I loved it that much. So that is why that is on this list. The next book is also an anthology, and it is Slasher Girls and Monster Boys, edited by Genevieve Tucholke. I've probably pronounced that wrong, I definitely have, but this actually was, in a rare case for me, a perfect anthology. I gave it 5 stars. Realistically, most people would probably give it 4 or 4.5, but it was just so up my alley that I couldn't rate it any lower. This is a collection of kind of spooky themed stories, but they're not really... A few of them are quite scary. They're all just kind of general horror young adult short stories, but they're all so creative and really well written, and I just had an absolute ball reading the anthology. They all flowed together really well, which is again rare in anthologies, I find. So it basically felt like I was reading stories all written by the same author, even though each author still brought their own unique voice into it, and you could tell, like, it wasn't a bad thing that they all sounded the same. It was like it was written cohesively and created together as a project, which I really loved. I'd definitely recommend this if you like horror. Even if you don't like horror, I would give it a try potentially, because none of them are really gruesome or graphic. There was only about 2 short stories in the entire collection that I wasn't a massive fan of, and I still didn't hate them. And it was just a really enjoyable read. It was really great, and one that I'm definitely going to reread in the future. The next book I've talked about before in my channel, and that is Heart-Shaped Box by Jo Hill. I read this in, I think it was April, and this is a horror story. This is about a man who used to be like a famous rock star, and now he's still pretty wealthy and well known, but he's no longer making music and he's a little bit washed up. And he has a habit of collecting things from the occult, and one day on an eBay type site he sees a ghost for sale and he decides to buy it. And that's all I'm going to say about it. There is a plot element early on that I could reveal, but it's not revealed by the blurb, and I didn't know about it, and I thought it was quite a nice early on surprise, so I'm just not going to say anything about that. But needless to say, the ghost is real, and things just start happening to this man. This was a really well written horror story. It's one of the few books that has genuinely scared me a little bit. I don't get scared by horror books. I read a lot of Stephen King, as you can tell, and only one of his books has ever scared me. Joe Hill is actually his son, and this was terrifying. It's written really well, and I just wanted to know what was going to happen next. I couldn't predict anything. It's not written like Stephen King, so you should be aware of that going in, but there's certain elements where you can tell that he was raised by Stephen King, if that makes sense. But yeah, this is just a fantastic ghost story, and I would definitely recommend it if you like Stephen King. You might not have read anything by Joe Hill, and I haven't read his other books yet, but I think this is a great place to start. It's a very self-contained, reasonably length story. Speaking of Stephen King, we have a book from him, and it's actually a novella, and it is The Long Walk, which was written under his pseudonym, Richard Bachman, or Bachman, I'm not sure how you pronounce that. This I've actually read twice this year. This is how much I enjoyed this, and the first time I think I only gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and then the second time I bumped it up to 5 stars because it'd been like 3 months and I wanted to reread it. This is incredibly short. I think it's like 180 pages on my Kindle. This is about a dystopian world, and in this world there is a contest called The Long Walk, and teenage boys sign up. I think you have to be 18 maybe, somewhere around that age. They volunteer, it's entirely voluntary, no one's forced to do this, and all they have to do is outwalk everyone else. If the boys stop, they will be shot. They get 3 warnings and then they get killed. If they collapse for whatever reason, again they get shot after the 3 warnings. They just have to walk and walk and walk, and it doesn't sound like much of a plot, but it's really good character exploration. The main character is just talking to loads of boys as he's walking. You get lots of snippets about this world that they live in, and it's revealed in a really engaging way because it's through the characters rather than giant blocks of exposition. And I just really loved it. I'll probably reread it again soon, although I need to read other books, but I'm not sure what it is exactly. I really like bleak stories, particularly bleak Stephen King stories, and this is a really good example of that. Next we have a thriller which I actually read really early on in the year and I forgot to put it near the start of this list, but it is The Last Mrs. Parrish by Liv Constantine. This has a little bit of a story to it. So if you've read The Wife Between Us by Greer Hendricks and another author who I can't remember unfortunately, but I'll pop it down below in the description box. But if you've read that book, you don't need to read this book. Essentially these 2 books have the exact same plot. They're both thrillers and they both have the same shocking twist, and I read them both within like a couple of weeks of each other. The Last Mrs. Parrish was the one I read second. I'd already read The Wife Between Us and loved it, but The Last Mrs. Parrish didn't shock me because obviously it has the same twist, but I still really enjoyed reading it, and I do think it's the better of the 2 because it has better character development. It's got more interesting plot elements beyond the twist, so this is the one that I recommend. But if you have read The Wife Between Us, you won't get as much out of reading this, unfortunately, and you might find it a bit derivative, even though I think The Last Mrs. Parrish came out first, but they came out so close together that you can't say that one author copied the other. They were clearly written at the same time, and it's just an unfortunate coincidence. But yeah, The Last Mrs. Parrish doesn't get any... I think I've heard one person talk about it on BookTube, and it deserves a little bit more recognition because, like I said, I do think it's better than The Wife Between Us, and it's a little unfortunate that's the one that got famous. But yeah, if you haven't read either of them, I'd highly recommend The Last Mrs. Parrish. It's a really good thriller. Next we have another thriller, and I I was a little unsure about adding it to this list, but on a reflection I thought I definitely do want to add it. I do remember a lot of detail about it and I did really enjoy it, and that is The Death of Mrs. Westaway by Ruth Ware. This is a thriller. It's about a woman who, she's really poor, she's down on her luck, and she tells fortunes. I can't remember where it is. I think it's somewhere in England, maybe Blackpool. She tells fortunes anyway, and then she gets this letter sent to her house, and she gets told that her great-grandmother or grandmother has died, and she needs to go to the estate to collect whatever she's been left. She is not related to this woman, but she decides that using her skills as a fortune teller of reading people, she's going to go to this house and try and claim the money. When she gets to this house, it's this massive gothic mansion, and all the family's a little bit weird, and stuff just starts happening that you'd expect to happen in a thriller. It's really, really engaging. It's so atmospheric with the setting. I particularly liked it because it reminded me a lot of Agatha Christie. It doesn't have the same strength of the mystery element to it, but it's got the whole setting and the thing that I like, which is all the family members each having their own secrets and all the way they interact with each other being important. The ending wasn't the best for a thriller, but the whole experience was really enjoyable, and I think I gave it like 4 stars overall. And like I said, months later, it still stuck with me. I still vividly remember that one, which unfortunately doesn't happen with thrillers. The way it usually works is that you really enjoy it when you read it and then you immediately forget about it, at least if you read a lot of them like I do. But this is definitely one that sticks in your mind, and it should be one that people check out, particularly for Ruth Ware, because she's quite a well-known writer, and I think a lot of her books unfortunately are a bit forgettable once you finish them, but this one definitely isn't, and for that reason I think it's probably her best. So the next book is actually a sequel, and that is Shiny Broken Pieces, which is the sequel to Tiny Pretty Things, both by Sona, Charaipotra. I've probably pronounced that wrong as well, I'm sorry. This was a real surprise, and I was debating whether to put it on my most surprising list instead, because I'm not going to do any I'm not going to put things on the same lists basically, but I enjoyed it so much that I felt like I had to go on this one. I won't say anything about Shiny Broken Pieces, I'll just talk about Tiny Pretty Things because spoilers, obviously it's a sequel. But this is about a group of girls and boys who attend a ballet school and the kind of intensity of that environment. It's not quite a thriller. I guess it kind of is a thriller, but it's not really. I think it's better if you think of it more of a young adult contemporary with dark or more intense elements. This really caught me off guard. I wasn't expecting to love it as much as I did, but it's got such a good cast of characters. It's got really good switching points of view, and you get to understand all the characters really well, and as things develop you kind of change your viewpoint of a lot of things. And yeah, I can't really talk much about it because a lot of what happens in it is meant to be a surprise, but basically they're all competing for the same roles in the massive production at the end of the year, and it's just really good if you enjoy intense reads about people competing for things. Yeah, so I don't have a lot to say about this, but I was so engaged by it that I immediately read the sequel to it straight after I finished the first one. I don't normally like to do that, but I had to do it with this one because I wanted to know what was going to happen. The sequel does take some character decisions I'm not entirely happy with, but I think by the end it justifies them, and I really enjoyed both books. I think it's a really good little duology. I don't think there's going to be more, but I could be wrong about that. So the next book is also a sequel, and that is Thunderhead by Neal Shusterman. I have actually talked about this before on this channel several times, so I'm not going to go into massive amount of detail. But Scythe is a book, Thunderhead's a sequel to Scythe, and Scythe is about a world where people no longer die. They are only killed by scythes, who are like professional assassins who maintain the population count. And 2 teenagers, a boy and a girl, they get selected by a scythe to become an apprentice, and they have to be an apprentice for a year, and then only one of them will be selected to be an actual scythe and the other one will be killed. Thunderhead is the sequel to that, and it improved on Scythe so much in my eyes. It had really good world building, it had great character development, I really liked the directions the plot took, and it's the second of a trilogy, and yet the ending, without, again, no spoilers, but the ending was impactful, and it wasn't just setting up the third one, it actually was a story within itself, which I really appreciate because that's so hard to do with books in a trilogy. And I'm so excited for the third one, I can't wait, it comes out next year, and I'm just going to get it as soon as it comes out. Ultimate book is another fantasy, and this is Forest of a Thousand Lanterns by Julie C. Dow, I always forget the C. This was another surprise. I read this for the Fall into Fantasy readathon, and it's been on my TBR for ages, pretty much since it came out. And I absolutely loved it. It's a retelling of the Evil Queen story from Snow White with Asian-inspired elements to it, set in Asia. But I always feel like the Snow White comparison kind of diminishes it a little bit. I do understand because it is a retelling of Snow White and there are elements of Snow White that are in it, but I think you could easily ignore that if you weren't aware going in that it was a retelling of Snow White. It definitely stands on its own as a story. It's got a fantastic protagonist, really good side characters, bar one. There's only one I didn't like, and that was the love interest. And it was just, the magic system's really cool. I like the entire world building thing. I still have yet to read the sequel, and I'm a little apprehensive about the sequel because it changes focus to the Snow White character, and I don't really think I'll be as engaged with that, but I'm definitely going to read it. I am still excited to read it. But if you enjoy fantasy, or even if you don't think you like fantasy, because I didn't think I was that into fantasy and I absolutely loved this, I definitely recommend checking it out. It's a really solid fantasy story and I really enjoyed reading it. Final book I don't think anyone will have heard of, and this is Fantasticland. This is a book I got off Amazon. I think it regularly goes on sale, so you can get it for like 99p. It's by Mike Bockoven. Again, might be pronouncing that wrong. This was such a surprise. I kind of got this because I thought it sounded good. And it's a bit of a weird one. I'm not sure if everyone will like this, so you have to read the description and see if you'll like this. But it's effectively a horror book, but it's more like counting of an event that's happened, and it's grounded in the real world. So this is about a theme park that is kind of like Disneyland, and a bunch of teenagers all work there, and there's various lands within this fantastic land, and there is a disaster. So I think it's a flood, or maybe a hurricane or something. Tsunami? Maybe a tsunami. Anyway, there's some kind of disaster, and all the employees get trapped there. Now, they get trapped with enough food and enough supplies to survive, but due to the events that occur, they end up all panicking and breaking off and making little groups, and it basically turns into Lord of the Flies, where they all start attacking each other and killing each other. And this was such a well written story in terms of, I love how the author decided to do it. So it's got news accounts, and it's got interviews with different characters, and you kind of find out what happens slowly, and it builds to an event. This really is a really good read, and not enough people know about, which is why I wanted to put it on this list. But there are some elements that I'm not as keen on. It wasn't a 5-star read for me, it was about a 4.5 star, but I did really enjoy it. And if you like horror, or even if you like, I guess, again, if you like the kind of realistic, grounded, dark stories, this is a really good one to pick up. But yeah, not enough people know about this, and it deserves more attention, so do check it out if you think it's something that you will like. And that was my entire list. That was 10 books of 2018, my favourite books. Do let me know if you've read any of them. If you have your own list, please let me know. If you post a link down below, I promise I will get around to watching it. Yeah, I hope you had a wonderful 2018 and a really good reading year. I'll be uploading the rest of these videos some point in January. If you did like the video, please give me a thumbs up, it helps me out massively, and I hope to see you next time.